right, looks like we're live here. We're going to let folks jump in. We'll give folks just a minute or two to get into the system here and join us. I hope everybody's having a wonderful Tuesday today. Hot button topic today, CR 2026, what we're going to be discussing today and diving in. But Tanner, any other news that's come out in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, you said hot button issue, and CR 2026. It came out. I think I was out last week, so just about 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
But yesterday, if you were paying attention, there was some pretty big CMMC news. So we won't distract. But if you're anything like us, I know that we've been going through a lot of that.
Yeah.
Since yesterday afternoon. That's very fresh. But yeah, excited to talk about CR 2026. I know we put together a podcast a couple weeks ago and
Cool.
and posted that recently, but want to dive into it a little bit more today, give it a little bit more time as opposed to just our initial thoughts, and gives folks some tangible info to work with. So
I love it. I
yeah.
love it. We'll give folks just one more minute and we'll jump right in. So appreciate everybody joining us today during this lunchtime here again on Tuesday. Quick introductions, and then we'll jump right at it. So my name is Chad Spears. I'm the CISO here at InfusionPoints. And as always on these webinars, I am joined with Mr. Tanner Bailey. Tanner's the star of the show here, but Mr. Tanner Bailey, an associate and our FedRAMP's 20X lead here at InfusionPoints. And Tanner, I tell everybody that your ability to dive deep into 20X just amazes me every time. I'll keep things above water, and we'll stay at that level for me.
Yeah, I'll drown for you.
We'll let you drink from the water hose or the fire hydrant as you always do. But I appreciate that. Love having you back with me again for this webinar today. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We'll jump into the first one. So again, CR 2026. I was joking. I said, maybe we'll tell folks out there that CR 2026, CR stands for continuously rejiggering or whatever it is. But it feels like there's been a whole lot of shifts, a whole lot of changes. And this is kind of something that everybody has been overall waiting for. And now it's here. The rubber stamp is kind of dropped on that. So talk to us a little bit about that time frame and what we were anticipating, and now it's here.
Yeah, I know it's a little bit later than a lot of folks, including us, were hoping for. But the PMO was very open about as the timeline got delayed, they were open with the government shutdowns late last year, as well as as they got closer to it and realizing they wanted to put a little bit of the extra polish on it. They were open. They said it'd be out by end of June, and it was out by end of June. There's a couple of delays here and there, but that finalized date when they showed with confidence that it was out. So, I want to hark on the fact that you mentioned this is really it's what people have been waiting for.
Right.
And the reason for that, this will be a little bit of repeat information if you've been paying attention to the 20X and CR 2026 and its beta form or its preview form. But this is the goalpost, the milestone for transitioning from pilot and testing out 20X to putting it into practice.
Yep.
There's a timeline page on the CR 2026. It's like important dates is the name of the tab, and it focuses on when the 20X class ABC, when those pathways to certification are going to open up. And really, it's just Class A is starting here in like a couple weeks. It's just long enough for people to actually process and put together their packages, maybe update some changes that they've already prepped in anticipation for this release, just with what the final version of the requirements look like. So, yeah, I know that you talked about the continuously rejiggering, and we jest with that because the PMO's made it very clear that they're wanting to step away from that.
Sure.
And that's how a lot of us have felt over the and I know Pete and the team over at GSA and the PMO have said we hear you, trust us. So the goal for this again is CR 2026 is going to be the baseline / framework that you have to adopt. We'll talk about timelines and what the requirements look like. But once you adopt those, you can have those up through end of 2028.
Right.
And every year the PMO is planning to release a new CR. So like next year it would be CR27, CR28 afterwards, and then you can adopt those. And let's say you adopt CR 2026, and next year you don't want to wait until end of 2028 to switch to CR27. You will have the option to switch annually, or you can switch biannually. Based off of what your desire is. If you want to be an early adopter, or you see a benefit of CR27, for example, when it comes out, you don't have to be in CR26 until the end of 28, but that is when you have to move to CR27 at least by the end of CR20 or by the end of 2028.
Right. Yeah, and again, I do joke on the continuously rejiggering, right? Consolidated rules 2026 is what you'll hear discussed. We're going to shorten that today, CR 2026 or CR 26 as well. But it is just that. It's kind of, I believe it's June the 25th, I believe this date that officially dropped. And it is kind of the complete source of truth, if you will, for these requirements. And so at this point, if it's not written within these rules, then it's not officially a requirement. And so this is the source of truth that everybody was waiting to drop. And so it is here, and we're excited for it. And I think, we've got a quote up on the screen here. I was kind of thinking about this today prior to the webinar, and I came across this and really loved it because this is kind of how we've been feeling pretty much this entire time, I feel like, during the whole 20X piece. And I think that this outlines it really well with the direction that CR26 is taking a lot of things. And that quote is, "Yesterday's evidence is today's assumption." And yesterday's evidence is a little stale. Prove it to me now, and allow me to trust it again today. And then tomorrow, let's do the same thing. Trust it again tomorrow. And so we don't want to be in the business of providing assumptions. We want to provide trust and know that the environment is secure and compliant. So
absolutely,
I love that. So let's dive into kind of what's changed, why it changed, and let's talk a little bit. We're going to touch very briefly on the old model, if you will, and how things were, and now what CR 2026 is bringing us to in this new model, and kind of how things look at there. So as we're looking at that old model, we jump in. Let's talk a little bit about why FedRAMP changed. And in that old model, we had at the end of the day, you had a lot of documentation, right? Documents that would be out there supporting your evidence, supporting your environment, and essentially leveraging documents to try to tell the story. Then would come the assessment, right? And then from there would be hopefully the authorization once an individual met all the requirements. Those things have changed now. So talk to me a little bit about those changes and how they map back, Tanner, in the new process here for CR26.
Yeah. Again, this is becoming a plumb line quickly, but, we've been very clear that, with 20X and with CR26, we want to make sure that everybody understands CR26 applies to Rev 5 and 20X providers.
Correct.
So the goal with CR26 is to make it a more streamlined certification process, not a easier certification process from a security perspective. They're not making the limbo bar higher for the little kid. That's not the idea here.
Right.
They're wanting to get rid of the busy work aspects of the FedRAMP certification process, and basically just changing your package from something that was stale, like you said, to something that's living.
Right.
And that's why, your documents were your evidence, and then you still had to go get screenshots because you can't really trust the SSP doc.
Right.
To actually it might tell the story, but you don't, it's telling you instead of showing you.
Exactly.
So that's the goal with CR26, to update that process for the Rev 5 providers. We'll talk about the security decision record here soon. Macro view, Rev 5 providers, they still have to follow the NIST baseline, but there's also some CR 2026 specific requirements that are being added the Rev 5 providers. Most of that has to do with your certification process, if you're like a net new provider, or if you're, already in, working with an agency, your reporting cadences and reporting processes with agencies is going to change some very drastically in some ways. And then the NIST controls that have changed the most, or that your implementations from a security perspective will have changed most, is related to Vader. So regardless, all that being said, the new model wants to get back to the spirit of FedRAMP and it being a marketplace for agencies. And the best way that agencies can be the buyer is if the PMO makes the requirement for the provider to give all this information about why you should buy our product.
Right.
And so, a document can say all that, but they want to see they want the assurances, not the assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, and I think for folks as we're talking about this, the way that you should start thinking about these things is those static documentation, right? We talked about those that have the ability to go stale pretty quickly. We just need to be thinking about kind of the new model and how can we automate at the very least what you were already providing, right?
Yep.
So think about what you were already providing during your assessments to the auditor, and in its simplest form, it's how can I automate the pull of that screenshot, even, right? Or is there a command that we could run that would then prove that same thing? And so again, trying to reduce the whole assessment burden or audit burden and documentation burden, I think is a huge thing here in CR 2026. And just because the document, we all understand, in as security professionals, just because your documentation says one thing does not mean that that's how the actual environment is. And I think that's important that stakeholders are wanting to understand, show me what the environment actually looks like right now, less about what your documentation says it should look like.
Yep.
So, great to see that shift there from that static document, as we'll call it, into more evidence-based, and then that continuous validation piece of that. So,
yeah. I can go to Planet Fitness. I can say I go to Planet Fitness every day, but unless there's that log from where I scanned into Planet Fitness, there's no proof. So
I think should be proof as other places as well, and I like that analogy. But let's talk about, even on the slide here, we've got a little bit. Let's step back real quickly. So we've got some terminology changes up there at the very top as well, and I think that's important to call out. So we've been talking about this in our other webinars and podcast as well. Old model, we had authorization. Then we started hearing certification, and here at InfusionPoints, we even had a little fun with that, right? Because we got 20x authorized / certified. And so talk to me about that terminology change and what that means for CRs 2026 and what it means going forward as well.
Yeah. So, first one you'll see here is, authorization versus certification. Again, as a reminder, there was a lot of confusion in the industry around authorization from a FedRAMP perspective versus your authority to operate, so your agency authorization to operate. And to avoid that, FedRAMP is essentially saying, like, hey, we are not the body that gives you your authorization to make money with your government contract. That's essentially what they were trying to get away from. So FedRAMP certification is still you are on the marketplace as finishing the race as much as that means for FedRAMP, which means just lining up for the next race, which is your operational processes. So that's the first one. There were balance improvements. That was a big part of the transition / pilot period. So the balance improvements, those were things like your FedRAMP security inbox, your significant change notifications, your secure configuration guide. And the idea with the balance improvements is they were required for anybody pursuing 20x pilot certification, but they were also available for early adoption for Rev 5 providers. And the idea was basically to help prepare for the release of CR 2026 or CR26. So now there is balance improvements is sort of an outdated term at this point because it was meant to be a temporary term for that period, that transition / early adoption period. So now those requirements that were formerly called balance improvements have been baked into CR26. Like I think it's like responding to FedRAMP communications is the new FedRAMP security inbox. There's a couple of naming changes. Significant change notification is still there. Secure configuration guide is still there. There's instead of AFR, which was authorization by FedRAMP,
right?
With the terminology change, there's a new name to match the certification process. So get familiar with those terms. You're going to see a lot of overlap if you've been reviewing the balance improvements and the pilot documentation. It'll come to you. We don't have enough time to dive into all that today, but things will start coming to you if you've already been familiar with it.
Right.
Or people that have been part of the pilot, like ourselves, reach out to us. We've been learning this as we've been going as well.
Yeah. So for folks out there that are joining us today, again, if you go out to the FedRAMP marketplace, you are going to see that that certification class system has now fully taken effect, and that's going to replace the old impact level system or approach that was currently out there. So get familiarized with the new terminology, and it's all actually laid out in a very nice table. I love this fact as well. If you go review it, they've got the reasoning in there, and it makes sense when you review the reasoning. Even going back to the authorization versus certification piece as well. So take a look at that and fully understand this new language we're all talking.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a definitions page as well on CR26. I know you mentioned the table, which is for like some of the transitioned terminology, but there's also a definitions page that you can scroll through. And anytime where there's a relevant term used in a requirement, there's also the there's like a reference or an index to say like, hey, there's a link here. Click on this link if you're not familiar with this term. It's very helpful.
Right. Awesome. All right, let's jump into the next slide here and see where we're at. Awesome. All right, so let's talk about these 4 pillars here. We'll go through them real briefly here, and we'll kind of dive into each one of just a little bit, right? So the continuous security, I love the fact that we're leading with that one because that's one of the things here at InfusionPoints we've always stood upon is that at the end of the day, it's still security. Security did not change. Security still has to be there. It has to be the base layer. And if the platform or the environment is built around security in mind, then everything else kind of takes care of itself from a compliance perspective.
Absolutely.
And just presenting that data. The next one we'll have is automation. And then some of the bigger changes, right? Some of the machine-readable evidence, right? It was always kind of rumored that things may shift to that direction and being able to provide that, and we're here now. And then the overall operational compliance. And to me, that's the umbrella that really covers all this. Really, at the end of the day, it's prove what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, prove that the environment is kept up to date. So let's talk about continuous security a little bit here in that pillar there. And I'm gonna let you lead things off, but I'm definitely gonna jump in here as my primary role here at InfusionPoints, security in mind. Let's talk about the continuous security requirements and things that we're seeing there.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, continuous security reminds me of continuous monitoring in a lot of ways. So, if you're already familiar with the, playing the FedRAMP game, if you will, there's not as much of a change in the security requirements. It's how you're showing it. So that's why there's so much overlap in the 4 of these. You're doing continuous security, which means that your environment is configured a certain way, right? To say, we're gonna, do encryption by default. That's low hanging fruit, but encryption by default should be there. You're either enforcing that through an automated method, or you're showing, hey, we just got, an alert popped up for some reason. This got deployed without security or encryption by default.
Right.
Hopefully you're catching that earlier in your CI/CD pipeline. So there's also automation and continuous security in those processes and in monitoring those processes. So you're just applying the Kanban process as in an automated fashion as much as you can. And then the operational compliance bucket at the bottom is really saying for the things you can't really automate, like, if you're going to make a decision to change a configuration in the environment, the AI is great, but it can't read minds yet. So like, it's not going to say, hey, I've got this idea. Here's what we do. It can't automate the full change control process. It can't automate the significant change notification workflow. There's parts of that can be automated, and that's what PMO is expecting folks to do. But at the end of the day, from an operational compliance perspective, are you building those workflows to support and be supported by automation? Is your operational processes, is everything being gathered in a machine-readable format, or are you going to be asked to like, hey, go show me a ticket or a meeting minutes that this happened?
Right.
And it's not that those aren't valuable, but they're just not worth the operational churn it takes to prove, and it's harder to get them in machine-readable or automated formats. So there's, I know I answered your question about the top one with the rest of them, but there's so much overlap.
There is.
It's impossible to.
There is. And so I'm going to jump in on the continuous security here. And again, one that's, I'm all about. And I guess I should say, and maybe lead with this, here at InfusionPoints, I feel like this one to us is just kind of always been what we're about, and I feel like it may have been a little bit easier. And here's why. So hear me out, folks. At the end of the day, we have a security operations center. I got a phenomenal team that operates 365, 24/7.
Mhm.
Well, guess what? It's exactly what FedRAMP is wanting your teams to do or your environment to do as
Yep.
well, right? So we had analysts that would constantly be monitoring for alerts, or even if it's just an operational thing, like you stated, right?
Yeah.
Hey, some type of configuration drift happened. Did you get an alert that monitored that, and then had somebody follow up on that, create a ticket,
Yeah.
create a change request? Those things were already happening with human bodies, but now we're looking to have that built into the system, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm super excited about this. Again, security can't be something that you just check, once a day, once a month,
Yeah.
once a year. It truly is the operational status, which goes back down to the bottom one, right? The operational compliance. They do marry up really well, as well as the other two as well. Because at the end of the day, there's got to be some automation that's behind that to check it
Yeah.
on a continuous basis. But then also, what are you doing without output? Going back to the machine readable, bringing that into
Where is
things.
it living? Where can you see it?
Yeah. So for things like us in our SIM, right? So we had analysts. We've always had analysts logs coming into SIM. But if the data never made it to there, then you don't have eyes on it. So
Yeah.
again, that's why the machine readable evidence as well is so important. And I think that we're going to see the PMO. We've already seen it on the 20X side for sure, right? Building the trust center. But there's so many beneficial things that can come from that machine readable, that output there that can be built upon. And so again, these all four marry up really, really well together. I'm super excited about the continuous security because it's definitely what we're about here at InfusionPoints.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a pretty good transition into our next slide. We want to give you guys some tangible examples of how, especially if you're a Rev 5 provider, if you've been going through the pilot with 20X, or you're a CSP that's looking at the 20X certification pathway,
Yep.
Or profile, excuse me, certification profile. That's the new term from FedRAMP for that. There's not a lot of new news, if you will, with CR26, because all of what was the balance improvements were required to pursue 20X. And that's the major change for
Right.
F5 providers, is now balance improvements have become required. So, we'll talk about, the old versus the new here. So the SSP and the security decision record, to me, going through CR26 and having the experience from the 20X pilot, this was the biggest, red alert from hey,
For
this
sure.
is a fundamental difference that was also not really talked about too much in the pilot. But I think it's definitely going to be necessary, because the Rev 5 process is still going to require the NIST control implementations. So summary view here, you still have to do your NIST 853 FedRAMP baseline. If you were high, which is now Class D, you still have to do the high baseline that was defined, back in the day. But you're not doing all the relevant documentation should be there, but they're going to be transitioning to what's called a security decision record. So the idea here is it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a record of all the decisions you've made regarding the implementation of your system.
Right.
And this is new, so I haven't seen a security decision record yet.
Right.
But in my mind, the way that it looks is it says, for each control. So let's take like a CM6, for example. CM6 on, as of this date, this was our implementation summary or implementation statement, if you will. How are you doing CM6? Let's say there is a change control ticket that gets put into your system or into like your Jira dashboard, for example, or like our command center ticketing module. As a result of that change control ticket, or there's a new implementation, or there's a change to the implementation, or there's new technology that you've introduced that is relevant to CM6. CM6 is now changed. Your implementation is now changed. Obviously, you're still going to go through any significant change notifications you have to do, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, once that change is made, if the way you're implementing one of those NIST controls has changed, or you've updated like a KSI validation on the 20X side, there has to be a record for that change, and some details about why that change was made. So as a agency representative, I can go in and say, okay, I know, instead of it like being on the SSP version history, those are never detailed enough to capture all the changes, why they were made for each control. And nobody wants to go manually and sift through tickets. So on that security decision record, it's the one-stop shop where agencies can say, well, I noticed that this KSI validation changed, or I noticed that this implementation is fundamentally different than what I last saw. I need to go look at the paper trail. And that's what this is. It's a
Yeah.
machine readable paper trail,
Mm.
but it's something that agencies can, query and say, my CISO said that we need to go double check controls ABCD for all of my ATOs that
Yeah.
I've provided. So then they can go and query that and say, or search through that and check those controls and then see that based off the schema. They've also standardized the schema for a lot of stuff in CR26. So that is going to help agencies adapt as well
Yeah,
for all those machine readable items.
Yeah, for sure. I think two things to take away from that, right? Number one, machine readable. So again, it's not just human reviewers.
Mhm.
We have the ability to now have some automated systems consume that information and help us visualize that or understand what's going on there. But it's less about documenting how the control works
Mhm.
in the SSP, if you will, and more about the actual decision around that particular control or
Yeah.
why you implemented that. And what I love about that is it's not a cookie cutter model, right? So
Mhm.
it may be different for company A than it is for company B because the decision tree or the business need is different. And so again, as you mentioned, still got to have the baseline controls, still got to meet the spirit of control and all that. But at the end of the day, there may be a different business decision that was made as to why something is done, and it now outlines that and explains that for us as well.
Yeah, and it also it takes advantage of the flexibility that the previous Rev 5 methodology didn't have around, like, you could there's like a maximum number of not
Right,
applicable or not implemented controls that you could
right.
have because it's just it was more letter of the law. It was much closer to what the defined rule set was, and you had to implement those
Mhm.
regardless. And in very rare cases, you could have not applicable outside of control like mobile code. A lot of people didn't have mobile code. Cool, that makes sense. That's
Yep,
not applicable. But there was a lot of controls that just it wasn't. It was either not worth the investment, or not applicable to the agency, or the agency's risk tolerance was a lot more so for that control,
right.
and it saved the agency and the CSP a lot of money. So
Yep.
yeah. Diving into the next one, the POAM versus so POAM and monthly reports. I'll tackle both of those on the left with their new the new shiny Woody to Buzz Lightyear, if you will. The accepted weaknesses and the quarterly collaboration. So your collaborative conmon is the new term for your old continuous monitoring reporting methodology. Um, Old school, you had a POAM, you had a monthly reporting
Mhm.
process. Weren't necessarily required to meet with your agency. It was highly recommended because
For
of
sure.
it just helped avoid he said she said via email.
Yeah.
Now there is a ongoing certification report. If you were in the pilot or reviewing CR26 previously, it was the ongoing authorization report. Now it's the ongoing certification report, which is a summary essentially of all your security, as well as it captures things like what is your vulnerability detection and response, what's the health looking like there. Do you have accepted weaknesses? That's the new
Mhm.
term for basically a deviation request, if you will, in the old school Rev 5
Yep.
process. And then there's quarterly collaboration. So you notice that your ongoing certification report is only quarterly.
Mhm.
You make that available. And then you're required to host a synchronous meeting as a result of your ongoing, or as a part of your ongoing certification report.
Yep.
But it is on the agency for representatives or your agencies, if you have multiple customers, to join. You host the meeting, you make that recording available. You can make the decision as to whether you want the recording available to the general public or non-agency stakeholders, non-security stakeholders for marketing purposes, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but yeah, so less meetings, which is nice.
That is
There's
nice.
still that and the reason you're able to do that is because you'll have your trust center that has live
Yeah.
KSI validations that check for things like your VDR dashboard. It'll say, hey, we have a vulnerability that is out of SLA. A error will happen automatically as opposed to being tracked as a late item on a POAM
Yeah.
reported potentially 3.5 weeks later.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a great call out there, right? Hopefully less meetings from this. And I think that that lends itself back to the continuous piece, right? I
Mhm.
mean, if you're constantly checking these things, well, then hopefully we don't have as much drift from the environment. Going back to what you just stated, hopefully you're catching things before 3 weeks. But If that's the case, that's an awkward conversation to then have your stakeholders. But I like those quarterly meetings. But it's also there is required to submit that quarterly report as well. But also it's like, well, and submitting the report only quarterly. What about the time in between going back to the trust center, right? Well, the data's there, and they can review the trust center, which is a requirement as well.
That's a good call it as well. They're moving away from like connect.gov for the repo. Every CSP will be responsible for hosting their own repo.
Yep.
That being the trust center. Or you would have a repo on your trust center. We recommend having a public one and a private one.
For sure.
And then same thing goes for like your KSI validation dashboards. Host a public version so people can shop.
Let's not put your don't air your dirty laundry if you have any out there publicly.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the that ongoing one important thing to call out too on the ongoing certification report is you're required as a part of your trust center to have a asynchronous like feedback mechanism. And on your certification report, there's actually like an anonymized summary of feedback received, and we would recommend also like how did you respond to that feedback, so people can see that during those periods between the quarterly sessions, there might be an agency representative submits and says, "I noticed this is late. Explain, or give me a reason why, or what is your current response process looking like?" And you can say, "Okay, cool. John Doe or Tyler Durden from our agency reached out and said XYZ. This is how we responded." All the sensitive information is anonymized, but everybody can learn from that.
Yeah, and that I misspoke. That's exactly what I meant. Do air your dirty laundry, because that's what the trust center is about, right?
Yeah.
Hey, if there's a change in the environment or something that happens in the environment, we want to be able to see that. But what I'm stating is let's not put your WAF rule sets out there, and let's not put all your IAM policies out there publicly for people to understand exactly how your environment's put together. But again, it builds that trust factor. And so very, very important. I love the fact that you can go out there and check it now at the trust center. I actually go out to our trust center probably once a day and just refresh to kind of see, how we look, and was there anything major that was changed? But I think that's important for building that trust with the agencies, for them to be able to see it at any point in time. Go out there and look at it.
Yeah, and I'm predicting as well that maybe it's from me, growing and experience in the field. But I think if you're able to show it, obviously systems are not perfect.
Right.
There's no expectation for systems to be perfect. And I think that's an acknowledgement from FedRAMP that's going to help a lot more. The old school SAR, the assessment, we haven't even talked about the assessment process, which probably won't even get into today. We're really talking about this from the perspective of the CSP getting ready for the assessment.
Sure.
But like the assessment process, used to be you have a net new high, you're done. You can't have a high finding that isn't like a net new vulnerability scan that's still within SLA.
Right.
So I think that CSPs are not going to try to get away with stuff anymore, because it's going to be, your dirty laundry is going to be aired. Like, you can't get away with it.
You can't get away with it.
But I think that in instances where, crap does hit the fan, I think people will be a little bit less like scared. Sure. I don't think, because like it's going to be like, oh, we don't want anything to get out there. Okay, the stuff that's not a big deal but is important to still take care of.
Yeah,
it's people know about it. Not the end of the world. You're not immediately on the stand because you had a KSI metric go into failure.
Right.
But when the real stuff actually happens, you're like, okay, I've worked through. It's the same process. This is just a bigger security deal.
Yeah.
That's just a prediction. Maybe that's tinfoil hat, Anner, but I think it'll help to say, okay, cool. A finding is not the end of the world.
Yeah, for sure.
The big findings people will be trained and ready.
I think there's a lot of, there's a lot to that you just stated there. Findings are not the end of the world, but I think it's okay to have findings. There should be, right? Because that proves that the process is working.
You're actually testing your system.
Yeah, exactly. And I know throughout our trust center, we seen as we were going through the 20X process, right? We would have dips in the trends and KSIs that would show up in a yellow or orange state, and hey, we need to go address that. But that's healthy, right? That lets us know that, hey, the validations are working, the checks are working, and the automation is running. And so yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I think going back to what you said as well, that folks can't get away. There's no sweeping anything under the rug now. And so again, it's great overall for overall security, overall operational security of the environments. And I think it's really just taken us into this new age, and it's awesome to see. So cool. So we move on down. I think we've touched on the others down through there, right? So, hey, used to be leveraging things like Word and Excel to document all this. Those things now are going to be just simply replaced with machine-readable things, right? So JSON formats, APIs, KSIs. You've heard all the acronyms out there. At the end of the day, it's just being able to present the data in a form that it can be easily done something with, if you will. Maybe show that in a different light, i.e. the trust centers of the world. The APIs just lend itself back to the integrations and the automations that now are required to be built into the environments so that they can be checked continuously. And then the KSIs is just really that lean towards the new 20X model of, hey, let's start checking things in this manner. And again, don't look at that as a hit on your business. Look at that as actually an opportunity to take those KSIs and prove what's really truly important to your business for your environment. And so I like to see it within the changes.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's talk about the timeline. And I don't think there's anybody that knows the timeline any better than you, Tanner. I just let you plan my calendar around the time and the changes that are coming. But this one actually, I feel like snuck up on us a little bit, or I mean, they were saying they were going to hit this, but you know, I would be lying if I said I didn't think maybe we would slip a little bit. But here we are. So
yeah, I know there was a lot of conjecture out there as to whether, you know, for a while now, PMO has been very open that like, hey, CR26 is coming out into June. By January 1st, they become mandatory. Well, actually, excuse me. When they're released, they are the new requirement.
Right.
There's a grace period where corrective action would begin in January, as of January 1st, 2027. So a couple of things to walk through here. You know, July 26, we noted that, you know, 20X opens. What we mean by that is the 20X certification pathway is going to open up. I believe they're starting with Class A, then Class B, then Class C.
Yep.
A reminder, Class D has not gone through its pilot phase yet. The PMO is, you know, wanting to basically gauge agency adoption before they finalize the Class D rule set. So I expect we might see a couple updates to CR26 specific to the Class D rule sets. Right now, there is no 20X Class D rule set available.
Right.
It's not been defined yet, and they don't want to confuse folks. One update that came out actually right before CR26. So if you're already FedRAMPed, you know your FedRAMP security inbox, there was a CISA notification that came out recently. And because of the CISA BOD requirement, I don't remember the ID off the top of my head, they are requiring that the VDR/VER requirements become, the grace period ends for those in December. So what I mean by that is that in December, you'll have to have already implemented the VDR and VER requirements. So those are really brother requirements. Vulnerability detection is how you're detecting it. Vulnerability, I'm blanking on the acronym. I know most of these. Well, do you remember VER's acronym off the top of your head?
let me look that up now, because I'm blanking as well.
Chad's going to double check me on that. But they're essentially the idea of detecting your vulnerabilities, measuring the exploitability of those vulnerabilities. I actually really like the new PAIN scale that the PMO's come up with. PAIN means potential agency impact.
Yes.
In rating. So it makes PAIN, agency PAIN, which is a lot easier to remember.
Vulnerability evaluation.
There you go.
Yeah,
so yeah, basically how you're detecting your vulnerabilities, how you're evaluating those, giving them a score, and then either mitigating or remediating them within certain timeframes. One important thing to call out there is that a failure in your KSI process or in your VDR/VER process is considered a vulnerability.
Yes.
Just like a scan result would be considered. So that's something that, you know, just gives more credence and more weight to the fact that, like, hey, how you're proving these things, the PMO is taking those just as seriously as they're taking the evidence that you're gathering through these methodologies, which makes sense. If you can't trust the process, then you can't trust the results of the process.
Makes sense.
And then finally, the rest of the requirements, you know, all of CR26 requirements minus VDR, VER, those become required in January. And what we mean by that is they're already technically required, but you're going to start to, you know, get the slaps on the wrist, get the corrective action plans.
Yes.
You know, nobody wants to be put on a cap. So, and then in June 27, I want to clarify, Rev 5 ending, we don't necessarily mean that Rev 5 providers are required to transition to 20X, but what that means is that PMO will stop accepting new Rev 5 submissions.
Correct.
Period. PMO's already made it very clear, don't pursue Rev 5 if you're net new. Just go to 20X.
Yep.
Again, this is Tanner speaking. My tinfoil hat is because I think they will eventually require all Rev 5 providers to switch to 20X methodologies.
For sure.
There's already so much overlap in
As you say, they're creating so much overlap.
There's so much overlap that I think that is apparent.
The writing's on the wall.
Yeah, the writing's on the wall. Good way of putting it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that's the overall timeline. There's a couple of other, like I said, the 20X opening. There's a couple of specific dates as pertaining to like which class opens when. It goes A first, then B, then C.
Right.
Yeah.
So for organizations out there, right, timeline wise, we're already here for CR 2026. That is live. VDR, VER coming, but then January 1 is or early January is your deadline, if you will. I don't want to call it a deadline, but that's when you will start getting those slaps on the wrist, as Tanner called them, if you will. But you're going to start getting those, landing yourself on that formal naughty list, if you will. So start looking at adoption now. Start seeing what you've got to do to start migrating your environment to meet these new requirements and rule sets. So awesome. Next slide. What we got?
What people should be doing today. So I mean, we talked about terminology earlier. Go review the definitions page. Build flashcards, whatever you want to do. I'm sure AI could put flashcards together really quickly.
Oh yeah.
Automating your evidence. We've talked about the fact that and what we mean by that, that's like get your trust center built out. Start building those. If you're pursuing 20X, build out some KSI validations.
Yeah.
If you're not, still consider having some KSI validation-esque automation in place.
Yeah.
Specifically for building things like your security decision record. There's a lot of the spirit of the KSIs are really shown there. Review VDR. That's probably almost where I'd start.
Yeah.
If I was a Rev 5 CSP.
I think that's going to be the biggest lift and shift there.
It's the first one on the timeline, and I know that's how people want to, do things. Is they want to, what's first?
Right.
When am I going to get in trouble first?
Yeah.
Or what? VDR, VER. We say just VDR here. VER, they're brother requirements.
That's right.
You can't do one without doing the other. Like I said, build your trust center, prepare your machine-readable formats, and then start planning for 20X.
Yeah.
And if you're looking as to which one to pursue, do 20X.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you talked directly with Pete at RampCon, and he was like, yeah, don't do Rev 5.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the statement was made is, your investment should be leaned towards 20X right now.
Yeah.
And so just echoing what's been stated there, that's the direction we feel like organizations need to start pivoting towards. And again, there's so much overlap. It's really going to make that transition. If you start thinking about these things, it's going to make that transition a lot more seamless for you, right? Again, the automated evidence piece, we've been preaching that on every webinar we've been on, right? We've been trying to help folks step through that and how to approach that. Where do I start in automating these things that I'm pulling manually? Well, just how about this? Start with a list of what you're pulling manually and then pick some off there and say, hey, how can we produce this from a command or via some type of API call or whatever it may be. And work with individuals out there as well. I think it's very important to talk about, partnerships and partnering up. We here at InfusionPoints would love to talk to individuals that are looking to kind of start marching down this path and maybe don't understand where to start. But anybody out there that's familiar with the 20X process and these new requirements can definitely help. But here at InfusionPoints, we have several customers that we're working with on the Rev 5 that will be implementing these changes and these new rule sets. But as well, we have plenty 20X folks as well, and they marry so well together within our platform. But at the end of the day, it really is that. I think if you had to pick one out of here on what CSPs should start doing, yes, I understand what you're talking about on VDR and VER. That's the first one on the timeline. But at the end of the day, it's really set your sights on 20X. If you start looking at that, everything's going to transition to meet all these other requirements anyway.
Yeah, and there's nothing saying that, this has to be I know the timeline we've talked about today has primarily been up to January. So, 5.5 months from now? But, build a more macro timeline up through 27 and say,
For sure.
hey, number one, yes, if you're Rev 5, get CR26 squared away.
Yeah.
But putting your sights on 20X could say, hey, I'm going to do CR26 right now, but I'm not Class D. I can actually be looking at 20X and just saying, okay, I need to do, if I do this, that'll prepare me for 20X.
Exactly.
And I can go ahead and transition to 20X and reap the benefits of, less expensive assessments. The new, there's a lot of benefits to 20X that we can't dive into with the time we've got today.
So that's why I'm saying put that on the roadmap, because if you start marching towards that, it's going to check a lot of these other boxes, along the way.
Yeah. And that business strategy is sort of the secret sauce in FedRAMP that makes FedRAMP difficult.
For sure.
And that's why it's been difficult in Rev 5. It's why it's been difficult, understanding 20X and all that jazz. So we, I know you mentioned we've got a lot of customers on like our existing platforms.
Right.
And, for reference, if you've been following us, the XP40 platform that we've shared, that is our 20X certified Class C system, but many of our other managed platforms with Rev 5 customers are built on a lot of similar methodology.
The exact same methodology.
It's the exact same methodology. It's just the Rev 5 flavor, and they're not reporting in the 20X format. So
right, exactly. That's why we go back to that 20X was nothing more than just a shift in how we report the data or show the evidence. And so,
So like all that to say, we've got experience with customers that are, we know their environment in and out because we build it and we manage it.
Right.
We're also working with a ton of customers that are purely in a consulting format.
Yes.
They manage in their own environments. We understand. Let's say you're a 5 CSP that's had an environment for 7 years.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, what do I do?
Yeah.
Like we have experience talking with folks about that as well. So obviously we want this to be educational and everything, but we don't want it to come across as like a marketing spiel. Hey, come use our product. If it's not applicable to you, then don't use our product.
Don't do it. Yeah.
Come talk to us. We're SMEs that can help you figure out how to adapt.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we would love to have conversations with, and are very open to having conversations with business stakeholders or anything that may be looking to say, hey, how do we align the business for this shift? And I think that's one of the first things that needs to be happening. But then also even getting as in deep as talking with engineers, because I know we've had conversations with engineers,
business stakeholder, agency reps. There's a lot of agency reps that might have questions that are,
it goes back to building that trust factor as well.
I mean, we've even heard stories of, in the GSA, there's a lot of confusion because it's just separate parts of the GSA. There's the PMO team, and then there's other units at the GSA that it's so new that unless you've been doing it like we've been doing it, it's understandable. So yeah.
So awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's what folks should be looking to start setting their sights on and building out that roadmap today. And start checking the boxes here for CR2026. But as well, I think it's a great path forward to the 20X piece as well. So let's talk about this. I mean, I don't feel like it would be a podcast or a webinar or anything technology-wise if we didn't touch on AI before we closed up. So, hey, where does AI fit in all this? We're seeing it everywhere. I know several of the conferences that I've been to, even within the last year, you can't go anywhere without having some form, fashion, or flavor or touch of AI in there, and we're none different. We're starting to see that. So how can we leverage AI tooling to help with this?
Yeah, I mean, AI, and I don't want to describe AI as just like souped up automation or insinuate that, but like how it can help you with building or designing that automation or saying, trend analysis. We talked about the ongoing certification report. Nobody really has time to go and read through let's say you had 50 comments of feedback in a 2-month period.
Yeah.
Nobody really has time to go read through that and say, all right, let me put together how would I summarize this and how would I make sure I scrubbed all the sensitive data?
Yeah.
You can use an AI agent, put together a summary, output that, then send that to approval for somebody. I know Alex and I've talked about this a lot with our ongoing certification report. This is, that's like the future state that we want to work with. It's like, hey, let's get a summary together and then have a human review it. Maybe, there's like CISO approval or something like that. And then that gets posted into the ongoing certification report available for agency consumption or other stakeholder consumption. And that's just an example. So how can you use it for your evidence collection or your control validation processes? Obviously, everybody's been talking about agentic SOC. I know that's, one of your favorite topics as well as the CISO, but like risk analysis or drift detection, how can you get the interpretation or the initial interpretation piece figured out. A
Right.
lot of people have been talking about tier one
Yeah.
SOC analyst or trend analysis to say, hey, every 6 months, for some reason, this thing happens and it's like a cert expiration. It's something very simple.
Yep.
But you're like, oh, it's been 6 months. John had a baby. And he's out, but he's the guy that's addressed it the last 2 years, and the only one that remembers it. An agent can pick that up easy.
Again, you go back to operational pieces of the environment. So yeah, you're exactly right. I think for me, looking at this list, the one that stands out, and you could actually probably pull them all underneath this one, is that recommendation engine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the perfect way to leverage it right now at a high level is, pose your ideas, pose your thoughts of, hey, what can we do and how do we get there? Use it as a sounding board, and throw some things at it. Talk to it about, hey, I've got this particular piece of evidence that I normally collect in a very manual state. How could I automate this? Ask it the question. But then going back to the analysis, it's, as we know, AI is very good at doing data analysis for you, detecting trends and patterns over time, as you've already talked. Documentation. But at the end of the day, if you look at each and every one of these, all I see is speed. The ability to allow you to move a whole lot quicker. We have a timeline now. And so I think that we're going to have to leverage AI into this to help folks move quicker.
Yep.
And I think that that's the way to use it, right? It's nothing more than another tool in the tool belt. And so knowing how to use that tool in the tool belt and understanding that, if that tool's meant to be a screwdriver, it's not going to probably be very good at hammering nails. You know what I'm saying? And so use the tool appropriately, use it for the specific job. But at the end of the day, I really do think use it as a sounding board, something to throw ideas off of. And I think what I have seen personally is it will alter the way that you're thinking about something you may not even have thought of solving in a certain manner. And then AI will prompt you back and it's like, man, that's ingenious. I never thought of it that way. And so it really gets you down the path a whole lot faster.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to make sure we get time for questions, and we're approaching the top of the hour, but this is really a good way of summarizing. It's still it's still building the system to the security standard. You're operating it in a secure manner. And then you're just proving it, and that you're doing both of those steps in a secure manner, and then defending or reacting.
That's it.
And that's you're still going to need the the human in the loop. You're still going to need the SMEs that know the system, and can actually interpret those, maybe with the help of AI.
Exactly.
Stated. But this was just a really great way to summarize it. Yeah,
and folks may be thinking themselves, well, I've seen that somewhere before. This is how we operate at InfusionPoints, right? And this is where we found success in 20X and even NCR 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we approach questions, key things to take away beyond like the timelines that we talked about in a lot of our recommendations is that engineering compliance into your process is the requirement, not doing compliance for the sake of compliance.
Right.
There's actually engineering. We've talked about platform engineering in the past. So platform engineering is going to be key. Again, evidence is replacing your paperwork. We've talked about that. Machine-readable security decision record instead of a manually documented, manually updated SSP. Automation has become mandatory, and not just from a compliance perspective, but also from a business perspective.
Right.
From a speed to market, cost to market,
for sure.
All those things. It's not just FedRAMP that's requiring this. The industry is requiring this.
Yes.
And then finally, continuous trust. It's the competition side of things.
Yeah. I've said that this is the opportunity. I feel like the snow globe's been shaken up a little bit with all of this. And so for businesses out there, this is an opportunity. It really is.
Yep.
But I think it's going to start with that very last bullet point there, right? The continuous trust. Help individuals, stakeholders, agencies, consumers of your product understand how they can trust what you're showing them and the evidence you're putting forth, and how they can trust the security of the environment.
Yep. So you get to set your own standard.
I love it.
Which is great. So, but yeah. We'll move into questions. So, Chad, I know you're...
I'm monitoring. If you got questions, go ahead and throw them in for me. See, all right. So got a few that's coming in here. Where should Rev 5 CSPs be focusing their attention under CR2026, and in what order? I think we touched on that just a little bit, but Rev 5 CSPs, talk a little bit about that briefly.
Yeah. So, from a timeline perspective, if you're looking for what comes first, as far as what do you need to have implemented first from a corrective action perspective, that would be VDR / BER, just based off of CIS's requirement and the pivot that FedRAMP has introduced. I would really recommend wrapping your head around everything from a security decision record. I think is going to be the hardest pivot from Rev 5. If you're already doing your vulnerability scanning process, there's going to be some updates to your frequency potentially, and then how you're reporting those vulnerabilities. But otherwise, what you're doing day to day doesn't change once you get that reporting function in, because the KSIs aren't required yet for Rev 5 providers. It's getting the trust center set up, transitioning to a machine-readable SDR instead of a manually documented SSP, and then reviewing the new certification processes and what has changed. Things like, if you're Rev 5, you've already got the FedRAMP security inbox in place. That was required as of, I want to say, February of this year. Your secure configuration guide should already be documented. Familiarize yourself with significant change notifications and have that conversation with your agency. Particularly talking about the requirement of what is going to need an assessment. You don't technically require an assessment for anything that isn't a impact categorization change, which is moderate to high, or low to moderate, or even if you're going to downgrade your certification from high to moderate or moderate to low. That's a new requirement that I think won't be applicable to most people. But there is in the language, should have an assessment for a transformative change. So talk with your agencies. The agencies would be the ones that are going to say, yes, you have to do an assessment. FedRAMP says you don't have to. They recommend it. But in this case, we're requiring you to. So, build that trust, continue to build that relationship with your agency and talking about it, and get their thoughts. See what their agency adoptions can be key for here. So have that conversation with your agency, or explain to them how it changes the system. They may not know.
That leads perfectly into this next question that popped up. I want to make sure we get to this one, right? Because I think that trust word, there's so much importance to that. But the question came in here, what does good enough evidence look like in 20X? But the latter part of this is what's so beautiful. It says, where do you expect FedRAMP or the agencies to push back? And to me, I'm going to jump in right here briefly. I want to get your thoughts though, Tanner. It really does boil down to that trust factor, right? Especially with the agencies, right? Help them understand how they can trust it. And so what I would be excited to do is say, well, individual or agency representative, here's how we would present this data in the traditional Rev 5 scenario. Now let me show you this exact same data in the 20X scenario, right? Same security metric or same security implementation, same security being applied here. I'm just showing you the output differently and help them understand how they can trust it and how they can see it. But now what's so powerful is hey, representative from the agency, by the way, you can check that every single day as well. So I think that there's a lot to kind of that mapping back, because you got to go back to what they know and what they understand and what they had built trust in already, right? To help them now understand how they can trust and move forward in this new modern world we're in.
Yeah, that's all good points. I really like the question of what's good enough. I think that's I think Pete would love to hear that question if he's not listening already. But the what is going to be good enough from a risk acceptance perspective, from a proof perspective. One update with CR26 is all of your I know this question was specific to 20X. Your KSIs, they've now made it a requirement that every KSI requires at least 2 checks or 2 evidence pieces. So that's part of your good enough question, is you have to have at least a twofold proof. I think that what you said is, refer to a lot of these KSIs are not NIST coded, but NIST inspired in a lot of ways. So, using a seam, think about it in the same way that you would have thought about the AU controls. What are all the things that you would want to prove? Go back to your previous assessments, or, consult a 3PAL or a C3PAO, excuse me, and talk to them about what are all the things that you would be checking for. I'm sure they'd be willing to answer some questions
For sure.
and talk about 20X, because I know there's a lot of C3PAOs that are trying to learn as well. So, getting their thoughts on that, but it's really going to be a matter of, if you can prove it, probably need a really good reason for not proving it, or not adding it to your portfolio, if you will. And then it's going to be a matter of agencies. I think the good enough to get this certification is going to be that C3PAO conversation,
right?
Because C3PAOs are going to be the ones that are doing the assessment and providing that information to the PMO. The PMO will then walk through and say, using the C3PAO's review as a baseline, they'll have some comments or some thoughts to get your certification. At that point, it's going to become an agency conversation. Talk with your representative and say, hey, what are the KSIs that you care about the most? In the past, Rev 5 agencies had overlays and said, we want to know exactly how you're doing these controls. Let us know. We don't want to go through your SSP. So they'll send you a spreadsheet, you fill it out, send it back. I think they're going to have something similar for KSIs. So, really good question though. If you, I know that's a little bit vaguer of more vague of an answer as I'd like to give at this point, because I really don't want to promise anything. But if I would love, whoever sent that question in, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or chat on LinkedIn. I would love to dive into that conversation more, as I'm sure you've probably got some ideas.
For sure. For sure. Well, listen, we're at the top of the hour here, and we're going to wrap things up. I do want to close it up by just simply stating this. Hey, listen, there's still a lot of questions, I'm sure, out there. People are still trying to kind of wrap their mind around this change and what is now implemented as requirements. And so, as Tanner has already mentioned, feel free to reach out to either one of us on LinkedIn with questions or anything you may have. As well, continue to follow along with our webinar series and our podcast for more information, because at the end of the day, here in InfusionPoints, we're trying to lead with education and help you folks understand exactly what's going on in the FedRAMP and compliance world. So for each of y'all, we thank y'all for joining today, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.
Good.